Post from ugotheglizzy. What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? Comment from OscarDivine. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down, you know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids. It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested. TLDR. Patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid and I removed the larva. Comment from AkierraLFS. I had brain surgery roughly 3 years ago. I lost my concept of time. What felt like 4 months was only 3 days. The amount of physical, mental, and emotional pain I went through was crazy. I had to find all of my memories and relearn how to walk, talk, everything. If you want to go through something terrifying, that is it. Comment from Bitter Critter Bug 92. This happened with my sister-in-law. When she was about 11 or 12. Her and her family lived in a trailer park. Just down the street was her bus stop for school. Each morning, she would see a man in his trailer taking pictures of her and her friends. It creeped her out, so she went to tell her mom, my mother-in-law, of what this guy was doing and how he would just stand in the window staring at them and taking pictures. So, her mom calls the police and report him. The police didn't do anything. This went on for about another 2 weeks with no action from the police, to where now my sister-in-law is terrified to stand and wait for the school bus and her mom had to call the police again. This time, the police actually arrived at this pervert's house and lo and behold, the police find a wall covered in pictures of my sister-in-law, some of the other neighborhood little girls and some child porn. Her and the other families watched from afar with this guy cuffed up and being escorted to the police cruiser. Comment from IM_vegan_by-the-way__. When I was a little girl, 9 years old or thereabouts, I was playing at the school down the street from my house. It was the middle of summer and myself and a girlfriend were hanging around watching the boys play street hockey. One of the boys called my name and said a man in the parking lot was looking for me. The parking lot was mostly obscured by the building, but I could see an old 70s style van that hadn't been there earlier. I was walking over to the van when the mother of one of the other kids showed up looking for her son and asked me what I was doing. When I told her someone in the van was looking for me, she took my hand and started to walk with me and the van pulled out and sped away. Friend's mom walked me home and I wasn't allowed out of my yard without my parents for the rest of the summer. I was so upset and didn't understand why I was being punished. It was only years later that I understood that I was likely being targeted by some opportunistic scumbag for who knows what. Thanks Mrs. Gibson. Wherever you are. Edited to add. Thanks for all the awards. Kind internet strangers. Just wanted to address a few FAQs. My parents didn't say they were punishing me. They just kept me close to the house. So I assumed that I was being punished. I lived in a very small, safe, we don't lock our doors, town. Kids roam the streets from sun up until sundown. Typically, playing in the old quarries and on railway tracks and on gigantic limestone hills and all kinds of shit we'd never let our kids do now. A few people were worried about Mrs. Gisbin's son. He was fine. We all were. She had come in from the other entrance to the schoolyard behind us, whereas the boys were closer to the parking lot. I barely got within shouting distance of the van before it sped off. Most kids are unfortunately abducted by people they know, so I have no way of knowing if it was some creep who knew me from all the activities my parents had us in or just some opportunist guy who said to the boy, "You know that girl over there? Can you call her over for me?" We were all taught about stranger danger. Shout out to Canadians who remember, stay alert, stay safe, // and because Mrs. Gibson showed up, I'll never know if those lessons sunk in or not. Comment from Green_Apprentice. Short story. My wife is from Enterprise. OR, and I guess a kid in her school got beheaded on his way home. Was literally found with his head cut off on the side of the street, and to this day no one knows who did it or how it happened. Absolutely gives me chills. Comment from Logan Apple 09. When I was much younger, we lived across the street from a big family. He had a wife and 5 sons. And one night he brought his whole family into the living room and lined them up and pulled a shotgun out from under the couch and shot himself in the head. The kids were messed up again for the rest of their lives. Comment from Voidscale. IRL account. I used to love swimming. I'd go snorkeling, scuba diving, even jumped off a few cliffs into the water. When I was about 18, I read the Necronomicon, the collection of Lovecraft short stories. Not the real thing, had a good scare. Giggled at how silly I was to be unnerved and went about my life. Next year went to Crete on holiday. The first day I jumped right into the ocean with my dad and went out deep. Lo and behold, I feel something tickling my legs. I dive under to see, since it's too deep for seaweed to reach this high, and I wanted to see fish. Tentacles everywhere. I was so shocked I lost my air and panicked hard. I started breathing in water as glowing eyes, sharp beaks and suckered tentacles flashed about me. Thankfully, Dad got me to the shore and didn't understand what was going on. He'd seen nothing but suddenly had a really grim look on his face. Went to the doctors. Turns out I'm the victim of a family curse. Schizoaffective disorder. My dad was horrified cause since he hadn't got it like his brother and mother. He thought I'd be safe. They caught it early, but this revelation then led to a lot of aspects of my life being thrown in the air. Entire people in my life became false. Ideas I'd had were delusional. Outbursts revealed to be due to mood swings. I'm doing much better now. I still don't go in the water. Comment from JamesRenner. I'm a crime writer and once interviewed a woman who told me an unrelated horror story about something that happened to her as a girl. When she was like 10, she had trouble sleeping and imagined the boogeyman was living in her closet, staring at her during the night. Every night she would come down and tell her parents, and every night her father would tell her the boogeyman didn't exist and she should go back to bed. Well, this happened for several nights and the father got tired of it. So that night he walked her back to her bedroom, turned on the light, and said, "I'll show you there's no boogeyman," and went to open the closet door. But something on the other side held it shut. He sent his daughter out of the room and forced the door open to find that a man was inside. He'd been sneaking into their house every night to stand in the girl's closet and watch her, and maybe more. He beat the ever-loving shit out of the man, and the man went to prison. When I interviewed this woman, I looked him up online. He'd recently gotten out on parole and had skipped out on his weekly checks. There was a warrant out for his arrest and nobody knew where he was anymore. Edit. People are asking for the source. I googled his name for the first time in years and, well, the good news is he's in prison again. Comment from somewhat of a legend. One day as a kid I was exploring the forests near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars, Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl. In that forest, a guy walking his dog found it, after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater. While staring at the backpack, we stopped exploring the forests after. *edit. English is hard sometimes. Comment from Siggy Butt Brain 666. A kid from a couple towns away from me lived on a farm with his girlfriend. They were in the kitchen one night. She was cooking and him and his friend were cleaning their guns at the table. His went off and shot her, killing her immediately. He then loaded up, ran outside and shot himself in the head. Comment from _genealogist. This week in Cologne. From the wall next to Autobahn, a concrete plate fell down into ongoing traffic and hit one car, killing the driver. After the inspection, they found another 6 plates that weren't properly constructed, just like the one that fell down. Comment from Nick_Pears. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back, he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. Comment from _asparagus. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake that is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. Comment from huggalump. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. Edit. It was a fungus, not bacteria, apparently. Comment from White Owl Roker 1. Walking my dog and crossing the street with a green light and a guy blows through the red light and almost hits me and the dog. I yell, "Asshole," and he slams on his brakes and turns around and pulls into parking lot ahead of me. I get closer and see the car has Illinois plates. I live in PA. He says, "Careful who call asshole, I've killed people." I just keep walking and he drives away. The next day I hear spree killer Andrew Cunanan used a stolen credit card at a gas station in my town. 100% was him I called a asshole. Comment from HarperPit011. My mom was stalked by a guy in her chemistry class. This was back in the late 70s. During her first semester at college. They were lab partners, and mom thought he seemed cute and nice, and was too shy at the time to ask him out. But she said if he'd asked her out, she would have went. They were friendly with each other in class, but their paths didn't cross outside of that since they were in different majors. As the semester wore on, however, she noticed he was often waiting for her outside of her other classes. The library, the student union, out in front where her dad picked her up and dropped her off. This continued into the spring semester. Puzzled, but not yet alarmed, she asked him how he always seemed to know where she was. He proudly said, "Oh, I asked the registrar's office for a copy of your schedule. My mom went to complain to the secretary who gave out her schedule. And the secretary blew it off because, you guys are dating." Luckily, mom had already arranged to transfer to a different school for sophomore year, and spent the remaining time left avoiding him. She never saw him after that. But it wasn't over. Flash forward to grad school. Mom was at work, and grandma gets a knock on the door. Since the man at the door was in a naval uniform, and my grandmother was a Navy nurse, she let the man in. Because he looked rather sad, he starts off by saying how sorry he is for my mother's loss, which completely mystified grandma. "Well, ma'am, I just got back from overseas, and I found out my friend recently killed himself. He spoke so highly of his fiancée, your daughter, and I wanted to meet her." My grandmother told him her daughter didn't even have a boyfriend at the moment, let alone a fiancé. It doesn't take too long to establish the man's deceased friend in question was in fact mom's stalker. The naval lieutenant was pretty upset, and my grandmother even more so. She made him leave before mom got home. The weird thing about the stalker's death is that it was ruled a suicide. But he hanged himself from a very high up tree branch you'd need a ladder to get to. And his hands were tied behind his back. From what my mother later learned, he had a tendency to snoop and generally stick his nose in places they didn't belong besides the obvious stalking thing. And this didn't win him too many friends. So it's anyone's guess who he might have pissed off. My mom always concludes this story kind of nonchalantly. Like, yeah, back in those days, they didn't really know much about stalking. They've gotten a little better in terms of awareness now. It gives me the creeps to think what could have happened if he escalated his attempts to follow her after she left that school. Comment from liquorballsammy. I was in the drunk tank with a guy who beat another man to death. The guy didn't die immediately. Was in intensive care for 3 days then died in the hospital. The man who killed him told me specific details about it, and on the third day, when the guy in IC died, the COs came in the cell and put him in isolation across the hall. They left him in general pop until the guy actually died, and once he was officially charged with capital murder then they took him out of our cell. I was 17 at the time. Never forget being scared to fall asleep right next to this dude. Comment from Nana_. Off the main road of a place I used to work at, a guy decided to climb under a bus to hitch a free ride. Well, the bus went over a speed bump and the guy fell and ended up getting caught on the back wheel. His body was dragged 5 blocks before the bus driver realized what was happening. A police officer who came into our store regularly told us that the guy was still alive when they got to him, but died an hour later. He said his whole back was scraped off, exposing his spine. I remember driving down that road after the fact, and you could still see a deep red blood-stained trail going on for those 5 blocks. Absolutely horrifying. Comment from Kalaghni. There was a man who got out of his car after it broke down on the highway and attempted to walk across the highway to the other side late at night. He was hit by a car and his body was driven over so many times that by the time the sun came up his body parts were scattered across 300 meters of highway. https://imager.com a v2rkxfj edit. Link to image of event. Comment from Mandorism. One of our employees fell into the hammer box. This is a device filled with ultra-high torque rotating hammers used to grind up large appliances into scrap metal. It apparently turned 3 times before the emergency shutoff was hit, pulling in half the employee's body at a diagonal running from the middle of his pelvis to his shoulder. The gruesome part was that he was still alive, as the pressure from the hammers was holding the enormous wound shut. Took 30 minutes for EMTs to arrive while he screamed for them to simply turn the machine back on and end it. He didn't make it. Comment from Slappy_McSlippenstein. When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. Comment from jgbelvis. I think the story of Tina Fey getting the scare on her face is super fucked up. She was a kid just sitting and playing in her front yard when a random guy pulled up, got out of his car and slashed her face for no reason with a razor. WTF. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.